Oh come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel.
We are, as we kick off the season of Advent and move over to, we're going to do this, we're going to kick off Advent and spend the next little while in the Gospel of John. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing and that we're going to be doing is we have the opportunity to hear from other church families. I've invited a number of church families to do the reading, to share the text, to read the text that we're going to be looking at as a way to just encourage the rest of us so that hopefully we get to see one another maybe in a way that we haven't in quite a while. And so that's what we're going to do. And so this morning, our text this morning, we're going to be focusing on John chapter 20, verses 29 to 31. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. We're going to play this, and here's our reading for this morning. Take a look.
Hello, everyone from the Villafania family.
A reading from the book of John, chapter 20, verse 29 to 31.
Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you see me. Those who believe without seeing me will be truly happy."
Jesus did many other miracles before his followers that are not written in this book, but these are written so that you can believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Then by believing, you can have life through his name.
Hey, thank you to the Villafania family for doing our first reading and sharing our text with us this morning. It's good to do it. Next week we'll have another family, and just every week after that, and I've reached out to a number of you, and we're gonna see how long this goes. I think it's just a great way to, again, just kind of help us feel like we're even more a part of a community and we're not completely separated, that there are others around. So thank you, Jeff, Roma, Arjo, and Aiden for bringing our text to us this morning. I am somebody, and this is something that I think some of you, for those of you who are big-time book lovers, this is probably going to be not just borderline, it's going to be outright heresy, what I'm about to say. But I have a habit, I have a tendency, when I go to a bookstore and I'm browsing bookstores and I'm looking for a new book to read, a fiction book, a story, a novel, something like that to read, I am one of these really, really irritating people that I'll pick up a book and I'll skim the first chapter because I want to know if this book is going to grab my attention. I want to know if this is something that's going to really draw me in and something that I'm going to be interested and really engage me in and something that I really want to read and spend my time reading. And then after I skim the first chapter to see if it catches my attention, here's the heresy part. I will flip to the last chapter and I will do the same thing with the last chapter. I will skim the last chapter because there's a part of me, I'm one of those sick and twisted people. I want to know how it's going to end. So I want to know if it's going to grab me and I want to know how it's going to end before I even dive in and start reading the story and reading the story to see what this is all about. See, I get really excited when I read a book. I get really excited about seeing how the story is going to unfold, but I want to know where is it going. So in a sense, I'm looking for hints for that. That becomes almost like my filter, my lens through which I read everything else leading up to that point. I know many of you are probably cringing and thinking, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. That's just what I do. We're going to do that with the Gospel of John. We are starting at the end today because I want to make sure that we are on the same page, that we have a good sense of what is John's end game. Where is he going? What is the point that he is making? So as we go through and read these stories in the Gospel of John, where is he going? What does he want us to know? What gems are we supposed to pull out of these stories from the Gospel of John as we go through them? The verses that we just heard, the verses that we're looking at and that we're focusing on this morning, John chapter 20, verses 29 and to 31. Verse 29 actually comes at the end of one of the more well-known stories, I think, in the Gospel of John. This is the oh-so-famous sort of doubting Thomas scene and story that comes up in the Gospel of John. The whole context, the overall context, Jesus has been crucified. The resurrection has already happened. Some of the disciples, they've seen Jesus. They have had their own personal encounters with Jesus, and now they're going back and they're telling the other disciples, look, we've seen him. He's alive. And then you get Thomas. And Thomas is like, no, hold on a second. It's impossible. Once a person is dead, they're dead. They can't be alive again. They can't come back there. None of that can be the case. He's dead. What do you mean he's alive? If he's really alive, I need to see him. I need to see him. I need to see for myself that he is alive. Thomas struggled to believe that Jesus struggled to believe in Jesus, or that Jesus was alive, until he saw him with his own eyes. Jesus needed to be revealed to Thomas in order for his faith to be solidified in him. And in this scene, in the story, Jesus acknowledges that. He acknowledges what Thomas needs. He acknowledges that many people actually are really a lot like Thomas. He acknowledges that that Thomas needs to see him, but Jesus also praises those who believe in him without actually seeing him. That's what we read there in verse 29. Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. What is necessary for any of us is to see and to come to terms with who Jesus is. Who is he? Who has he been revealed to be? We often say, and you often hear people say, look, I'll believe it when I see it. Seeing is believing. If there was a number of years ago, there was this thing that would go around on Facebook that maybe a friend or maybe somebody on Facebook would share what feels like this completely outlandish story that's just completely unbelievable and makes you think, nah, there's no way that's true. And then you would hear this phrase, people would start throwing these things out, pics or it didn't happen, pictures or it didn't happen. See, we don't believe it. The story sounds too incredible, too outrageous to be true. So we need evidence. We need proof. We need to see it. Give us a picture that proves, a video that proves that what you're telling us actually did happen. Because when we see it, then we will believe it. But faith usually takes the form of believing is seeing. Not seeing is believing. Believing is seeing. John, in his gospel here, if we are going to get the most out of our time in the Gospel of John through Advent, and then we're actually going to continue John on past Advent, because there's a lot here and there's some really good stuff here. If we are going to get the most out of our time as we spend time in the Gospel of John, we need to know what we are supposed to be looking for. That's why I jumped to the end here as we kick off this new season and this new series here. I want us to know and understand, what are we looking for? What is the point of these stories? John is telling a whole bunch of stories to help us see Jesus for who he really is. John wants you to believe. He wants us to believe. He wants us to accept. He wants us to know who Jesus is. And we need to understand that and grasp that in order to get the most out of these stories as we go through the next few weeks in John. Verse 30. Let's take a look at verse 30. Here's what he says. Here's what John writes. And it's really kind of a frustrating verse in all honesty. He says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. This is the stuff that conspiracies are made of. If you really kind of think about it, when you have a text, when you have a book, when you have a biblical author who's flat out saying, look, there's a whole bunch of stuff that Jesus wrote. Yeah, I gave you some stuff and I shared some things with you, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that Jesus did that we're not filling in, that we're not writing, that we're not sharing, that we're not including in our story. That's the kind of stuff that conspiracies are made of. I think it was last week, or maybe it was just this past week, actually. I think early in the week, I came across some kind of article or something. It was like 30 things that are hidden in the Vatican vaults. And if you've spent any time reading like the Da Vinci Code and Dan Brown, and you get into all these kind of religious and Christian and church and Catholic Church conspiracies, you know that the Vatican vaults, the Vatican Library and the Vatican vaults are sort of this place of mystery, and there's all sorts of stuff there, and people wonder, what's really there? What is the Catholic Church? What is the church really hiding? And one of the things that jumped out on me on this list was that the claim, and I've never heard this before this article either, but the claim is that the Vatican has a painting of Jesus that was actually made of Jesus himself from that time, from the early first century, that Jesus sat down in somebody's house or whatever, and somebody else actually painted a picture of Jesus. And that jumped out at me because in the Bible, we have stuff like from Isaiah. Isaiah says, kind of describes the way that the Messiah, that the promised one is going to look, and says that, there's nothing about his appearance. Basically, he's going to be an ugly guy because there's not going to be anything about his appearance that's going to draw people. But that look of Jesus, what did Jesus look like, is one of those things that is not mentioned and is not brought up in the Bible or in the Gospels. But that's one of those things that a lot of people are really kind of obsessed with. What did Jesus really look like? There are things that we want to know about Jesus. You think about yourself. What do you want to know more about Jesus? When you think about Jesus, you think about, man, I really wish the Gospels would have included a story about this, or would have described this more, would have said more about this. What details do you wish the Bible gave us more of? I know if it were me, I would love to know, what jokes did Jesus tell as he was sitting around the fire at night with his disciples? You ever think about that? It's like, what kind of jokes does God tell to his people and to his little friends in his inner circle? Because we all do it. We all sit around, and Jesus was human. He was God, but he was also human. He did very human things just like the rest of us. Jesus told jokes. Jesus played games. But we don't have any of those stories. That's the kind of one of the stuff those are some of the things that I would love to know. And John says here, he says, look, Jesus did way more than what is listed here, way more than the Gospels, than I or any of the other writers are going to tell you. But I'm not going to tell those stories. Those are not the stories I'm going to tell. Because we don't need those stories. We don't need those things in order to see who Jesus is, in order to come to know and understand who Jesus is. John says, look, what I'm giving you, these are the stories we need to see Jesus, to know Jesus, to believe in Jesus. So what do we need? We don't need all the stories. What do we need? Verse 31. Verse 31. He says, but these things that are written, the things that I have written, the things that I have given you, these things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. The stories that we have been given, the stories that John has written down, are carefully selected stories to help us understand who Jesus is. Those are the stories that we've been given. Those are the stories that have been included in this gospel and in the other three gospels. Who is Jesus? What do we need to know about Jesus? And here are the stories that tell us everything that we need to know about Jesus. The stories that John gives us, these are stories that help us see that Jesus is the Messiah. Now remember in Malachi, which wasn't that long ago. We just wrapped up Malachi last week. We saw this last week. We saw this, I think 3 weeks ago in Malachi also. We saw some references to this. Malachi, one of the reasons why I picked and why I was preaching on, why we were going through Malachi, was because it's such a great transition into Advent, a setup for Advent. Malachi, a couple of times over in Malachi points out and brings attention to the promise that God himself would come and make us right with him. It's the promise that we have being reiterated and stated in Malachi. Advent, this season of Advent that we are now in, that we are now starting and kicking off here today, this season of Advent is all about shedding light on who our Savior is. The fulfillment of those promises in Malachi. To see who our Savior is, that we may truly see him and believe in him. Acknowledge him for who he is, our Messiah, our Savior. Jesus is the Messiah. He is the anointed one. He is our Savior. He is God in flesh. He is God with us. Those are the stories that we have. Stories that confirm and affirm and teach us that Jesus is the Messiah. The stories that we have, that John has included here, he says, these are stories that lead to life. I gave you these stories so that you may believe in Jesus, or believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and that by believing you may have life in his name. We don't have all the stories. We don't have every story that could possibly be told about Jesus, but we have the ones that lead to faith, and then from faith lead to life. Stories of a God who loves us so much that he himself came to make things right, just as Malachi promised. Stories that reinforce what Malachi spoke of when Malachi spoke of that great and dreadful day of the Lord. Stories, these stories and even the season of Advent and the whole thing of Advent, it shows us what exactly is so great about that day of the Lord, about the day that God shows up. These are stories that we have here in the Gospel of John and that we're going to spend time with. These are stories of hope. These are stories of hope, which is kind of a good thing, because you think about 2020, and 2020 has been a year that has left, I think, every single one of us desperate for some sign of hope in our life. Hope that things can get better. Hope that we will be safe. Hope that we will survive. Hope that our bills will get paid. Hope that our friends and our family and those closest to us, people who live on the other side of the country, maybe even some cases on the other side of the world, hope that they will be okay. 2020 is a year that has left us groveling and desperate for some message of hope. Ultimate hope can only be found in Jesus. And even then, ultimate hope can only be found if you truly see Jesus for who he is, that he is the light that broke into the darkness, that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is God himself, that he is the Messiah. True hope only comes if you see Jesus as the object of our faith, the source of all life, our hope and our peace, the only one who could possibly redeem us from our sin and restore us in our relationship with the Father. These stories in the Gospel of John were written down and shared with us and have been preserved and copied and printed and reprinted and shared and spoken of and sung and preached and proclaimed over and over and over again, so that you may believe that he is the Messiah, the Son of God, and so that you may have life, so that you may see Jesus for who he really is. We believe to see. We believe to live eternally with him.